So coming up this weekend, we're going back to the Apex for UFC Fight Night, Blanchfield versus Barber. And in my opinion, this is one of those cards which could be really, really good. Or it could be like it is on paper, which in my opinion is a little bit of a weaker card for the Apex. Now you guys know I'm not an abandoned warehouse defender by any means. And it is unfortunately because I did get to live through the glory days of the UFC, hosting events in an arena very regularly. And I do believe that the Apex just does kind of take away a little bit of a fan connection there, but I can recognize when there is a good UFC Apex card on, and I personally don't think that this is one of those ones, but I do think that there is going to be some gems in amongst this 11 fight Apex card. Now, I do understand that a lot of fights were cancelled. Some of the better fights, the more entertaining fights, I think were cancelled, but we still have Gamrot versus Klein. That's a big fight at 155. Ramiz Brahimaj versus Goff should result in a finish. Reese versus Todorovic is definitely going to result in a finish. I would be shocked if it doesn't. And Andreas Gustafsson makes his debut. He is a lot of fun. I think that this fight card could be a lot of fun. Now, speaking of potentially getting some gems in there, you do of course have the We Want Picks premium membership where you get access to Angelo's bets, Jacob's bets, and Sam has been placing bets as well as the articles that I do put out nearly every single week. I am going to take a little bit of a break, but I'm going to mention that just in a moment. But I did do Road to UFC episodes 1 to 4. I went 70% overall, 9-1 on episodes 1 and 2. 5-5 on episodes 3 and 4, unfortunately, so I didn't finish off super strong, but 70%, I will be honest, is a lot better than I have done in years past, because, as you guys know, finding tape on those guys is next to impossible. The next one is LFA. I did cover LFA, went 6-3, 75% there on the predictions that I did do out of that card, and unfortunately, a couple of close decisions. Hugo Paiva lost a decision I thought he won as an underdog getting in the main event. I also thought that the decision was pretty close. And then, yeah, so I went 6-3 on the LFA card, but I do believe some people profited off of that based on the Discord notifications I was getting. So speaking of the Discord, it's free to join the Discord, the We Want Picks Discord. There's so many people in there. You can talk to me, Sam, Angelo, Jacob in there. Jacob's not really in there anymore. But yeah, that's kind of it. This is a long intro. We're getting into Angelo levels of intros, 2.5 minutes. But the point is, if you do sign up to the We Want Picks premium membership, if you do sign up using my code ARTEM, you get 10% off your first membership. So that can be 10% off your first month. And of course, I do get a little bit of an affiliate commission there as well if you wanted to support me in that way. Because let's be honest, guys, my hairline, it isn't getting any better. Anyways. Rayanne Santos versus Ardelean is going to be starting off the card. I do think that Rayanne Santos does win this fight. Dos Santos, and I think you could even argue Ardelean in some aspects, are both a little bit undersized for the division, but I think out of the two, who I think is the more skilled fighter is Rayanne Dos Santos. Rayanne Dos Santos, of course, actually won the title at atomweight for Invicta FC over Jillian DeCourcy. She actually out-grappled her to win that one there and looked pretty good doing it. She was also on the Contender Series a couple of years ago, and she fought Denise Gomes to a pretty competitive decision. Her UFC run has been okay. I mean, 2 split decision losses. I believe this one was on short notice. You could argue that she beat Pooja Tamar as well, but it was close. And Ardelean, in my opinion, just not that impressed by her, I'll be honest. Now, she does have an Instagram, which is super viral. I think she's got TikTok as well. Very interesting content on there. I'll be honest, I think that's probably why she was signed. Dana White, what are you doing on Instagram Reels? But she lost to Shauna Bannon, and then she lost to Melissa Martinez, 2 primary strikers. Rayanne Dos Santos isn't a primary striker. I would say she's more of a grappler, but she doesn't really grapple all that often. So I think even then, Ardelean, I'm not too sure what she's good at. Like, you just look at her record, she's never really fought and beaten anyone good. She's a little bit small for the division, so is Dos Santos, but I think if Dos Santos wants to wrestle, she out-wrestled Jillian DeCourcy, who was a pretty successful champion for Invicta. I think she should be able to out-wrestle Ardelean. I don't think I need to break down this fight for too much longer than that. And now we have MarQuel Mederos taking on Bolaji Oki. Just full transparency, man, a little bit disappointed in Bolaji Oki. I was really high on him coming into the Contender Series. I actually picked against him on the Contender Series. I did pick the former Glory Kickboxing fighter, professional kickboxer Dylan Salvador to beat Bolaji Oki on the feet, because I was a little bit concerned by Oki's striking defense and also his cardio, because in this matchup against Naya Malikan, he completely gassed out in the second and the third round. But he just knocked out Salvador in the first round, so I was like, oh well, everyone is correct about this guy. Bolaji Oki is the real deal. And then he had a pretty average performance against Kawamba, who took him on short notice up a weight class, and then he was beating up Chris Duncan. But you know, Chris Duncan, one weakness that he does have in his game is definitely the chin and the striking defense, and then he got subbed by the guillotine. I'm not all that sold on Oki anymore, guys. You know, MarQuel Mederos isn't a guy that I've been super high on, but he has had impressive performances. He did look fantastic on the Contender Series. He knocked out Isa Azarkov in the first round by defending takedowns and getting it done. Landon Canones was on the Ultimate Fighter, had a bit of hype behind him. Mederos boxed him up and beat him. And then he beat up another wrestler, a pretty tough guy in Hubbard with the boxing. That was very close, though, I will admit that. But I'm going to go with Mederos in this matchup. Bolaji Oki, as I did say, we haven't seen it in the UFC yet, because I do think that he looked okay going all 3 rounds against Timmy Kawamba. But I do still believe that Oki does have some cardio issues, and MarQuel Mederos is a slick boxer. He's a boxer that will rip the body. You don't see that many people that are ripping the body in MMA, and I think that Mederos can work the upstairs and the downstairs with his hands, and I think overall land more volume, especially in rounds 2 and 3. I can see Oki having a good first round, but I think Mederos is the kind of guy that can take over in the second and third round if the going does get tough. And although he's the underdog, it looks like the majority of Tapology voters are picking him to win. And now Andreas Gustafsson takes on Trevin Giles. Now, full thoughts on this one. I actually do believe that Trevin Giles is the more skilled fighter out of these two guys. Now, I love Andreas Gustafsson as much as the next guy. Probably not as much as Betsam. Let's be honest, Betsam is slobbering all over this guy, Gustafsson. However, I do believe that his fights are super, super fun. When I was looking into him for the Contender Series, I couldn't really believe what I was watching. Some of the more entertaining fights that I have watched, probably ever, to be honest with you. He's got this massive one-punch KO with a big hook over Shoba, and then against Tony Lampinen, he just went to war with Lampinen. I mean, both guys in this fight were taking a lot of damage, including Gustafsson, which I think is a reason why I think that you could maybe make an argument for Giles winning this fight, because Gustafsson, yes, he is very strong in the clinch. Yes, he's very good at pressure, and yes, he's a massive guy for 170 pounds. This fight is at 180, but, you know, we'll still kind of base it off of that. He does have a big weakness. His big weakness is he's so hittable. And Trevin Giles, I know everyone talks about it every single time he fights. Giles genuinely does have a good jab. He was finding success with the jab against Carlos Prates before getting knocked out. He was finding success with the jab against Mike Malott, even though that fight was boring as. And he also... No, he wasn't looking that good against Blanchfield. Let's ignore that. Giles, though, he does have a good jab. He does fight well from range. Gustafsson did show that he can beat up a guy that does fight well from range, because Pat Pitlick is like a 6'2", 6'3" guy at 170 pounds with a lot of KOs. Gustafsson was able to back him up and just kind of beat him up against the cage, really. And that's Gustafsson's game. He's a dirty boxer. He wants to clinch. He wants to throw down, and he will throw big. He will land big, but he will get hit with big shots as well. Personally, though, I don't think that Trevin Giles is a powerful enough striker to really scare Gustafsson into trying to avoid these dangerous, aggressive opportunities. So I do think Gustafsson wins this one. He's also had the full training camp. I think that also Gustafsson versus Billy Goff was right there. You guys know how much I love the idea of having Andreas Gustafsson versus Billy Goff. Gustafsson's original opponent had to pull out, and then also Billy Goff's original opponent had to pull out, so they did some rescheduling. Oh my goodness, it was so close. Gustafsson versus Goff. I need to see that in my lifetime. That would be perfect. Anyway, I think Gustafsson does win. I do think he does find the KO as well. Trevin Giles is a good fighter. It's just kind of odd to see him go on this 3-fight losing streak, and now he's taking on a guy that's making his debut, and I'm going to be picking against him. I do think that Gustafsson stylistically has the chance to just come forward and knock out Trevin Giles. And now we have another situation where he's the underdog in Kurt Holobar versus Jordan Leavitt, and I am going to side with the underdog in this matchup. Now, Kurt Holobar is nearly 40 years old. Kurt Holobar is old enough to be my father. Yes, I know that the hairline is a bit sad, but I am I'm 22 years old. It's a bit sad, I know. Subscribe to the channel, guys. We're nearly at 10k. Anyway, I think that Kurt Holobar is better than Jordan Leavitt nearly everywhere. And I hope that doesn't come back to bite me, because Jordan Leavitt has had some really odd performances where he has looked good on the feet. But I think overall, Kurt Holobar, although he's not the most technical striker, I think he's the striker that's going to be throwing more and landing more. And I also do think that if the fight does get to the ground, that is Jordan Leavitt's bread and butter. This guy does have, I believe he's got a buggy choke in the UFC, which is kind of where he really... no, it wasn't the buggy choke, it was the slam. I'm thinking of someone else. Ignore that. Against Matt Wyman. I think Matt Wyman went for the buggy choke. I'm talking out my ass. Anyway, Jordan Leavitt, we all know that Jordan Leavitt only grapples. He kind of is like Chase Hooper, except now Chase Hooper's developed his striking. Jordan Leavitt hasn't quite managed to do that at the moment. I think on the feet, Holobar's going to have the advantage. I also think as soon as the fight gets down to the ground, Holobar's not going to be at a big disadvantage at all. Holobar is a grappler. We saw that on The Ultimate Fighter, actually, how good Holobar is on the ground when he actually got a big submission over Landon Quinones. Not Landon Quinones, Lee Hammond. I apologize. But he looked good in that matchup off of his back, and he did end up finding the submission over a gassed out Lee Hammond. I do think that in this one, Holobar has the advantage on the feet, and I think as long as the fight's on the feet, Holobar is going to look pretty good against Leavitt, who has been able to fade on the feet. Now, that was a mess of a breakdown. I apologize. Let's move on to Alan Nascimento versus Jafel Filho. Jafel Filho is a very popular underdog, and I can kind of understand why. Now, I'm also seeing a lot of dislike to Alan Nascimento, and honestly, I don't really understand it. I personally like Alan Nascimento. I like watching him fight. He is absolutely a brutal weight bully at 125 pounds, though. I'm very happy to admit that. But if he fought more often, I'd be a lot happier, because I don't know why this guy just does not fight so often. In fact, a lot of these cancellations aren't his fault, and then the more recent ones are his fault. Apparently he got sick, and then maybe he's gotten injured, but he hasn't fought since 2023, and he's looked pretty good in the UFC so far. Now, yes, as I did say, he's a brutal weight bully at 125 pounds. This guy is massive for the weight class. I don't know how he makes the weight class, and he's a grappler, and he kind of is just only a grappler. He does train with Charles Oliveira at Shooter Box. He is one of Charles Oliveira's minions, but he doesn't quite have the Muay Thai that most of these guys at Shooter Box Diego Lima do possess. He really does need to fight to get down to the ground, and if he is on the ground, even on his back and on top, he is pretty dangerous, and he does look pretty good. Jafel Filho, in my opinion, is actually kind of the same. Jafel Filho is also a BJJ guy. Both of these guys have the same style. I do think that Filho probably does have a striking advantage. We have seen Filho get hurt and hit before against Daniel Barras. Barras come out there and was landing hands on him. And, you know, as much as I love Daniel Barras, I truly do, Barras hasn't looked that good in the UFC, and having Filho getting rocked around like that by Barras, despite getting a quick sub, of course, in the fight, isn't a good look. And then even again, Ode Osborne, a good submission over him, but Ode Osborne also is not in the UFC anymore. I do think that in this one here, Alan Nascimento, we've got a grappling matchup. Alan Nascimento, I strongly believe, is going to have a ridiculous size advantage over Jafel Filho, and I think that he's going to be able to just weight bully him to a decision on top. Nascimento, not the most exciting fighter in the world to watch, I do understand, but I do like him to beat Jafel Filho if he can stay safe. And now we have what I think should be a fun fight. And the reason why it should be a fun fight is both guys, man. Both guys don't really have a chin, and both guys do hit pretty hard. Now, Zach Reese was a prospect, actually, at 185 pounds that I was quite high on. You know, this guy on the regional scene was dominating everyone, and although he was dominating not the best guys, he was looking pretty technical doing it. He showed that he could grapple. He showed that he had pretty technical striking. And then he beat Eli Aronov. And Eli Aronov, I don't think that win has actually aged too badly, as Aronov was looking pretty good against Drago. Will Curry before he completely gassed out. But ever since then, I'll be honest, he's looked okay. He couldn't finish Jose Medina. That was a bit of a red flag. And then against Bekaev, I actually picked him to beat Bekaev like an idiot, and then Bekaev just dropped him and knocked him out. I think we can kind of figure out maybe that Zach Reese doesn't really have too much of a chin, and we've got to remember as well Zach Reese wasn't TKO'd by Azamat Bekaev. He was TKO'd by Bekaev, and then he was knocked out cold by the referee, just slamming his shoulder and bouncing the back of Zach Reese's head off the canvas, putting him out cold. Brutal KO by the referee. I would be surprised if we ever see that referee in the UFC again, I will be honest. But Zach Reese, he just got KO'd brutally 4 months ago. The chin is a worry. I actually am going to be worried about Zach Reese's chin throughout his career. And the thing about Dusko Todorovic is, we know this guy has no chin. This guy has never had a chin. He gets rocked all the time. He's been knocked out 4 times in the first round. They gave him Mansur Abdul Malik, which is just some of the most evil matchmaking I think we've ever seen. He even got knocked out in the first round by Pillow Hands Punahali. I think that in this matchup, Dusko Todorovic probably is going to feel a little bit more comfortable on the feet than Zach Reese, because Zach Reese, you know, he just got knocked down, just got knocked out. Dusko is used to getting knocked out on the feet at this point. You know, he can probably just expect it to happen. But I think that the Zach Reese should win. He's going to have a massive size advantage in this fight. I think he's the better grappler in this fight. I know that we did have a D1 Dusko against Jordan Wright, but that was just Dusko trying to avoid getting knocked out, let's be honest, because Jordan Wright, despite being the karate kid that he was, probably would have knocked out Dusko if we didn't get D1 Dusko. I think that Zach Reese can win this matchup. I think he knocks out Dusko Todorovic. I think it's a bit of a meme fight as well. I think the matchmakers know what they're doing with that one. Ketlen Vieira fights against Macy Chiasson. I've always been a bit of a believer in Macy Chiasson. The problem is she could just never make 135 pounds, and when she does, she's very big for the weight class. But I will be honest, I think that she has looked a little bit disappointing in some of her more recent fights. Chiasson is a fighter that's been in the UFC since I believe she was 2-0 as a professional, which is pretty insane how she's kind of just really come up throughout the UFC at 145 pounds and then now struggling to make 135. And her most recent performances are good, and she was beating Irene Aldana in there. But the thing is about Macy Chiasson is, despite having such a big size advantage, she can get out wrestled, she can get out muscled. She has taken on Ketlen Vieira, who actually made a big name for herself when she did get a big splash going a couple of years ago by out muscling Holly Holm in what was a bit of a terrible fight. And then she beat up Miesha Tate, but that was karate Miesha Tate. You know, if you remember that was hilarious. But I think in this one here, I think Ketlen Vieira is going to be the more aggressive fighter out of the two. I think Ketlen Vieira can land the boxing against Chiasson. I think Chiasson, despite being pretty strong in the clinch and getting takedowns on occasion, could get out-muscled in Vieira in this one here. I'm not super confident in Ketlen, but I do think she does go out there and get it done. And now Ramiz Brahimaj taking on Billy Goff. Now, I'm a big fan of Billy Goff. I've been a fan of Billy Goff since before he was even on the Contender Series. He became the CES MMA double champion. He became the champion at 170 pounds and then the champion at 185 pounds when he defeated Justin Sumpter, who's on a bit of a run at the moment actually. And in these two matchups, you know, he knocked out Gary Bledsoe Jr. on the feet, and then against Sumpter actually ended up on top control and got a ground and pound finish there. Shimon Smitrisky's a pretty decent win. Now Smitrisky's been up and down on the regional scene since, but not a bad win. And then against, of course, Yusaku Kinoshita, it was the boxing to the body that really got things done, and he was only stopped by the 6'6" welterweight Trey Waters. And that happens, you know, when you're a 5'10" guy and you need to close the distance to land your shots and you're taking on a guy that's got super crazy range. I understand it, Billy. I do understand. Now, Billy Ray Goff, that's what he does. He does close the distance and he does throw a lot of hooks. And as I said, unlike a lot of people in MMA, he rips the body very, very well with his punches. He will go downstairs, and it was actually the downstairs shots, as I mentioned, that got him the win against Yusaku Kinoshita in a very impressive first round finish victory. He takes on Ramiz Brahimaj, a guy that does have a lot of submissions on his record. I do believe most of his wins are by submission in the first or the second round. And he did, of course, recently knock out Mickey Ghoul on the feet. But aside from that, absolute crazy outlier, which was just truly unbelievable in my opinion, I think that Billy Goff is going to have a pretty sizable advantage on the feet. I think that Billy Goff's wrestling is good enough to keep the fight on the feet, and I think that's going to be the key in this matchup. I do believe Billy Goff is the better striker out of the two. I do believe that Billy Goff's wrestling is good enough to keep the fight on the feet, and as long as the fight is on the feet, Billy Goff is going to be coming forward. He's going to be pressuring forward, not giving Ramiz Brahimaj easy entries into takedowns. And I think ultimately Billy Goff is going to find the TKO victory against Ramiz here. It is a short notice fight for both guys. Both guys were booked against different opponents, of course. And now they've been booked against each other in this one. Ramiz Brahimaj was meant to fight Aubin Elliott. And I do believe Goff was meant to fight Seok Hyun Ko. Goff versus Gustafsson. It was right there. It was right there. That would have been amazing. But anyways, we're not allowed to have nice things. This is the UFC in 2025 after all. Justin Jacoby versus Bruno Lopes is the featured fight of the night. I don't know how to get a read on Bruno Lopes, man. I really don't. He looked pretty solid on the regional scene, in my opinion. Come into the contender series against Brenton Ribeiro, looked slow, no striking defense whatsoever. Very, very unimpressive performance, and he got knocked out by Brenton Ribeiro because he just has no fight IQ to save him. And then against Marcos Brigagal, I thought that he had the same problem. I thought he looked slow. I thought he looked not very good. And eventually he did get the win, but I wasn't very impressed by the performance, GSP style. And then against Mikhail Saziniani is a pretty short, small 205-pounder, kind of built like me, and he just kind of come forward and he's just throwing punches with Bruno Lopes, and eventually Lopes was able to break him. But once again, like a decent performance, but not amazing. And then, based on that information, I picked Magomed Gaziaslov to beat him, and then Bruno Lopes just beat him. And Magomed Gaziaslov, if you guys know, is a guy that I think is really good. He's a guy that I've been praising, and I think Murtaza Talha, who's going to be on the contender series later this year, is also a very good prospect out of Bahrain, out of KHK MMA team. And Gaziaslov is a guy that I considered quite technical for 205, a guy that I considered to have good wrestling for 205, and Bruno Lopes broke him. He just broke him. I don't think he can break Dustin Jacoby, though. Dustin Jacoby, a former Glory kickboxer, a guy that actually left MMA to pursue Glory kickboxing and then come back, went on a really good run. He's on a bit of a bad run right now, but you got to remember that Dustin Jacoby, not that long ago, was on a pretty nice UFC win streak, and you know, he started to take on some of the better guys, and ultimately now he's kind of back down here fighting these guys in the top 25 to top, I guess 20, top 15 sort of range. And I think that Justin Jacoby against Bruno Lopes, as long as he keeps the fight on the feet, should win this matchup. Bruno Lopes, I will give him credit. He's good at grappling, but Bruno Lopes doesn't shoot for as many takedowns as I would like him to. When I picked him to beat Brenton Ribeiro, that was the main reason I picked him to win, was because I thought that Lopes was going to take him down. Lopes didn't take him down. He didn't even bother. But I think against Jacoby, surely that's in the game plan, but the thing is, Jacoby looked pretty good. I thought he showed good takedown defense against Azamat Mirzakhanov, where is it here? And I think that against Bruno Lopes, he should be able to do the same. I think that Jacoby has a speed advantage on the feet in this one. I think ultimately that's going to be what he needs to win this fight against Lopes. And now Mateusz Gamrot versus Leavitt Klein. I think that this is a fight that is going to have a lot of people divided. I know a lot of people are picking Leavitt Klein in this fight, and I do understand why, because there is actually a lot of evidence that does suggest that Leavitt Klein should be able to win this matchup. He has fantastic takedown defense. He has showed good takedown defense throughout his entire UFC career, whether that be at 145 and especially at 155. I think against Moises, he defended all 6 takedown attempts. I could be incorrect about that, and I don't really want to be wrong, but I do remember looking at the stats for that fight and seeing that Moises attempted a lot more takedowns than I thought he did when I was watching the fight, and that Klein was just able to defend them all. And against Roosevelt Roberts, remember, this was a performance that I think a lot of people were a little bit disappointed with, but once again, Klein was able to defend the majority of the takedown attempts. The problem, though, that I have when I pick this fight is Klein has put on a lot of weight since he moved up to 155 pounds. When he first moved up to 155, I didn't really love the move because he is 5'7". He isn't even that big. He wasn't even that big for 145, I thought. But now he definitely has filled in to a very sizable 155 frame, especially when you do consider his fight height. But I still think in this matchup against Gamrot, he is going to have a size disadvantage. And I believe that stylistically, a size advantage for the wrestler is pretty important when you are going to be going on in a wrestler versus striker matchup, because let's be honest, this is exactly what it is. Gamrot is a wrestler, and it's kind of all that he does. All he really wants to do is get the fight down to the ground. And although I don't believe that I can really hold this opinion anymore, at one point I do believe that Mateusz Gamrot in pure wrestling skill was the best lightweight on the UFC roster. Now, do I think that opinion holds now? Honestly, no. But at one point, and somewhat recently, I do believe that opinion did hold true. He did come off that loss to Dan Hooker, but I think that Dan Hooker is a bit of a different style to Klein, whereas Hooker is a lot taller. He's a guy that uses range a lot more than Klein. I wouldn't say he uses range better than Klein, but I think he would use range a lot more than Klein. Against Jalen Turner, another strike, he was able to take him down and win that fight on short notice as well. It's worth noting that fight was on. I think that just kind of ultimately in this matchup, it is a wrestler versus striker fight. Now, I think that the argument for Klein winning the matchup is regarding the fact that Klein is going to be too fast for Gamrot, because the striking difference between the two, I think, is going to be pretty significant. It is true that Mateusz Gamrot's striking isn't very good. That's why Dan Hooker was able to beat him. That's why Jalen Turner arguably did beat him. That's why I think a lot of people thought that Rafiziev was on his way to beating Gamrot as well before the injury. But I think just given this fight, just given this fact that I do still believe that Gamrot is a top 3 pure wrestling skill wrestler at 155 pounds against Leavitt Klein, who, yes, he has proven good takedown defense. I don't think he's proven good takedown defense against the level that Mateusz Gamrot does bring. I think that Gamrot should be able to get the takedowns and beat Klein in this fight, but I do see a lot of people predicting Klein to win, so I think that that's potentially a good underdog in this one, but I am going to be going with Mateusz Gamrot to win. And now we have Erin Blanchfield fighting against Macy Barber. I think that this is a good matchup for Blanchfield. I know I'm going way back for this one here, but I do think that this stylistically reminds me a bit of the Miranda Maverick fight, which Macy Barber struggled with a lot. And I think that Erin Blanchfield is a better pure wrestler for MMA than Miranda Maverick was in 2021. I think that Erin Blanchfield right now is one of the better fighters at 125 pounds. Yes, she did lose to Manon Fiorot, but in hindsight, she was giving Manon Fiorot some problems on the feet, more so with the pressure than anything, because her striking isn't incredible, even though it did look, where was it, really good against Jessica Andrade, which was just so weird. Just a one-off incredible striking performance. Since then, she did beat Rose Namajunas, and I think that she can beat Macy Barber in this one here. Macy Barber, of course, though, did recently have her own pretty big moment against Ketlen Chukagian. She then knocked out Amanda Ribas. I was going to say that was on a pay-per-view. It was not on a pay-per-view. Once again, making things up, but she knocked out Amanda Ribas. I remember that being a pretty massive moment for her career. She was meant to fight against Rose Namajunas. That's where I was going. I apologize. And then I lost it, but I think that in this one here, Macy Barber, what she brings to the table is decent striking, pretty good wrestling, but in my opinion, not good enough striking to really upset Blanchfield. I think to beat Blanchfield, you have to have a striking that's really going to upset the rhythm that Blanchfield's going to try and set up, and I think that someone like Manon Fiorot is pretty good at doing that. I would even argue that maybe Ketlen Chukagian could do that to Blanchfield. Rose Namajunas couldn't do it. I don't think Tracy Cortez could do it. I don't think Macy Barber can do it. I think that Blanchfield goes out there, gets the takedowns against Barber, and I think ultimately just controls, really. I think that if Blanchfield wins this fight, it's probably not going to be that exciting. I think if Barber wins, it would be a little bit more fun, because I think there would be a lot more striking involved. But I think that Blanchfield goes out there, gets the takedowns, and ultimately wins with grappling, with control. I could even potentially see a finish. You know, it wasn't that long ago she just absolutely dominated Marilyn McCann. She's definitely capable of doing that. I don't know if she can do that to Barber, though, because Barber is still pretty good. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Let me know what you think about this card, and I'll see you guys in the next one.